listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
How you doing? Hope everyone is good, and thanks so much for checking out my show Straight to Video. Had some really great response to the last few chats over the past month or so, and feels like the talks that you're listening to, they're really hitting the mark, and hopefully today's will be no different. This episode features a chat with not only one of the most talented musicians I've ever seen or heard, but also one of the most likeable and humble humans you could meet. I'm very much looking forward to you all hearing my talk with Mr. Eric Dover. So to list Eric's resume of achievements and projects he's worked on is quite the mouthful, but here goes. Early on in his career, Eric would land the slot of guitarist, touring with much loved and heralded 90s band Jellyfish on their second album Spilt Milk. This tour would take Eric all over the world, but the band would be short-lived following the promo for that album, but Eric would bounce right back and get the gig as lead singer for Slash's Snakepit on the guitarist's debut record, It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere. Another huge touring schedule would follow, including the UK and Castle Donington, which we speak about in our talk. And from there, Eric would form the band Imperial. He would go on to be a member of Alice Cooper's band, be part of not one but two Hollywood supergroups, Glam Nation and Lost Angels, and also release music under his alter ego Sextus. And most recently though, Eric has teamed up once again with his old Jellyfish bandmates Roger Manning and Tim Smith to form the Lickerish Quartet, whose recent output of 3 EPs have been championed by power pop and rock fans worldwide. I think I got most stuff in there, and we talk about it all in our chat on today's show. Before we get to that, as always, a shout to my friends at the UK's finest rock and roll coffee company, Dead Skull Coffee. If you place an order through their website, deadskullcoffee.co.uk, and add the promo code STV on checkout, you will bag yourself 15% off your order as a thank you for being a listener to this show. Okay, after our chat, if you want to check out some of Eric's music, I can pretty much highly recommend anything from his back catalogue. The quality is that high, but I'm sure Eric would dig it if you took a listen to Sextus on his Bandcamp page, or dive into the latest music from the Lickerish Quartet at thelickerishquartet.com. But I'll leave that choice up to you, and either way, you will not be disappointed. Right now, though, please enjoy my straight-to-video chat with Eric Dover.
Climb with you away into the night. The dream that took me over. You're the dream that took me over. I saw your eyes in my sleep. Yours a face I've longed to touch now. You're the one that I have need of. You're the dream that took me over. As I made my way downtown, endless lights in rearview mirrors. You're the one I think I finally found. Could you be the love of my life? I don't know, maybe I'm way too.
There we are.
Yes!
Success. How you been, my friend?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, man.
How's things? Keeping all right?
Yeah, not doing too bad. Summer's here, so doing some outdoor activities.
Yeah.
Working on some music still, and just trucking along.
Your career has been so eventful, and I want to give people who may have missed out some of the amazing stuff you've done a bit of an overview, but I want to try not to tread too much on stuff you've gone over many times in other chats. But going like way back, you're out in California now, but originally from Jasper, Alabama. So for folk listening here in the UK, you've got LA way on the west coast, but Alabama is right on the other side, jammed between Mississippi, Georgia, and I think it touches on Florida a little bit. So quite the contrast. Was it a fun place to grow up as a kid during like the late 70s and 80s as you were becoming a teenager?
Yeah, I would say it was a fun place to grow up. I actually lived around the Southeast. So I lived in Nashville. I lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I lived in Georgia a couple of times. Arkansas. My dad had a traveling job, so every few years you would move around, you'd go to a new school and get beat up and
Oh man,
have to fit in and do all that. But Jasper is where my parents are from, and it's kind of northwestern Alabama, so it's basically Appalachia. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's considered Appalachia, kind of foothills of the mountains, so to speak. It was great. I guess the generation I grew up in too, our parents didn't give a shit. They would say, go out and play. well, it's 100 degrees outside. We'll go out and play. And they'd lock the door and like, you don't come back. You get on your bike and you'd ride around all over the place and, go to swimming holes or do whatever. It was out in the country.
What were some of like your earliest introductions to music that like really grabbed hold of you, particularly like rock and roll music?
Well, I have an older sister who's 7 years older, which if you're a musician, that's like hitting the jackpot, right?
Yeah.
So she brought home all the English music is really kind of where I started. I mean, Elton John primarily, Bad Company, and then Alice Cooper and The Who, the Kinks. For some reason, my sister had great taste in music.
And that's cool. She could say, these guys are cool. The girls love this band. Listen to these guys.
And every one of those bands blew my mind. They still continue to. You go back and listen to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it's just incomprehensible how good it still is.
Just the huge melodies, stuff you recognize as soon as you hear it on the radio. It's timeless stuff.
It is. I mean, growing up, too, we had a lot of like AM disposable pop tunes in the house. We had a lot of 45s, a lot of classics, though, a lot of good American classic music like Don McLean, Dobie Gray. I mean, a mix of English and American music, but kind of a little bit more focused on English music for some reason.
Well, we're the same. I know like Americans gravitate towards the English stuff and we gravitate to the American stuff. There must be some weird romanticism behind it, some far off land.
Yeah, I think there is. And I've always had a fascination with UK and her music and musicians. I mean, from the time I was able to watch The Avengers and Doctor Who as a kid, it's like, wow, what a cool place. I really love to go.
When was your first time over here?
With Jellyfish, actually, in 1993.
Do you remember any of the places you played back then?
Brixton Academy, Bournemouth, played a lot of the really hip places. And I've, continued to through the years. I'm playing with Alice Cooper or Slash. I mean, we've hit all these spots. The last Los Angeles tour, we did a lot of really out of the way places, which was kind of cool. I've never been to Blackpool, but now I have. Anywhere I can go in a foreign country, it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to be kind of absorbing it and taking it in, You got your first guitar, I believe you was 11 years old. Was there anyone in particular that inspired you to begin to learn? I'd say the first Van Halen album dropped at that point. It must have been around that time. Well, it was. I also had a brother-in-law who was a musician as well, so he kind of taught me some of the basic chords, and then I was kind of off and running after that. I didn't get an electric guitar until I was probably 13 or so.
Right.
I did like every kid. I, cut lawns, worked whatever I could to afford it. And then one day I went to the record store and bought on the same day Van Halen 1 and Back in Black.
That's all you need.
Yeah, I couldn't decide which one I loved more, really. Still love both of those records equally. And then there were these bands like Nazareth that I was hip on. There's a lot of Southern rock growing up where I was at. There was Leonard Skinner and Molly Hatchet and some of that stuff. And I like the guitar tradition. I still love it. Doesn't matter really what genre it is. I love guitars.
How was it like taking your first steps into guitar? Then there is someone like Eddie Van Halen, Eruption drops. Was everyone trying to figure that out at the time? Or was like, holy shit, I'm still trying to figure out these chords. And then this guy's doing this space age, out of this world music.
Well, what's funny is in the county that I grew up in, I always hung out with older musicians because of my brother-in-law. So I was lucky to be able to see older musicians try to play this stuff. And nobody back then was really playing Van Halen. They couldn't figure out the tapping and all of that. So I remember I got Starlicks, I believe was the name of it. It was an instructional cassette tape that you bought, and it had tablature. And I remember buying the Randy Rhoads one and the Eddie Van Halen one. And boy, I took to that like a fish to water. And it was like, oh, so you do that. And yeah, I literally had to sit down. Nobody explained to me how to do it. I felt like such a badass when I finally did.
You suddenly had all the secrets.
Yeah, just, wow, tapping. It's so awesome. I mean, I love tapping. So that was how I started kind of learning at least some of the rock techniques that were going on at the time. Of course, learning Angus Young licks was a whole different affair because you're playing hyper blues. And you really needed to know quite a bit to play that as well. So I think I got a good cross-section of the two.
Just playing AC/DC in general, it's not as easy as it potentially sounds.
No, not at all. That hyper blues stuff is some of my favorite types of guitar playing because it's so loose and reckless. Whether it's Frank Zappa or Prince, they all have that in common to me.
Right.
They'll just start really ripping out and going off. And I was like, God, I want to do that so bad. Randy Rhoads was a whole different affair, though. A lot more discipline in what he was doing, too. I was lucky to see him 2 weeks before he died.
Where was that at?
It was in Birmingham, Alabama. It was just mind-blowingly good.
Who'd you go to that show with?
I took my sister, who was about, I don't know, she's like 5'5" or something. And we, of course, went up to the front of the stage and got crushed. But I didn't care. I mean, I was shorter than her. And I think we were standing in front of Rudy Sarzo.
Yeah. Was that like your first live concert, or had you been to a bunch before then?
My first live concert was Kiss, 1979 Dynasty Tour. That was the pinnacle of my 70s childhood dreams, to see Kiss. And I think my babysitter took me.
Yeah. Where was you for that one? Was you up in the gods, or was you able to get near the front for that show?
Oh, I was on the wings. A little bit too bashful and young to go to the front.
I got to ask, who was your guy in Kiss? Was you a Paul guy, Ace guy?
Oh, Ace Frehley. I know, and I'm friends with all of them except for Peter. When we would do our Kiss bands in grade school for the talent shows, you know, I was always Ace.
I love it.
And he's kind of like the Chuck Berry of my generation, honestly.
Speaking of like high school talent shows, I remember reading a comment on Facebook some time ago when someone mentioned your early band Scream, SKREM, I believe. I think the word was you absolutely slayed with a version of Everybody Wants Some.
That's right. That was my first performance in my high school. Then everybody was off to the races. We were all having fun playing guitar, like all of my friends that played, and, you know, we would get together. It was a wonderful time to grow up with music. But Everybody Wants Some was like, that was my anthem for sure.
Was you singing and playing guitar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was always the default singer because nobody wanted to sing. Starting out, I was truly horrible. Like, you know, I had Peter Brady voice. It's like, everybody wants some, you know. Trying to get my hormones all straight and everything. I'm glad I stuck with it because singing and playing is like my favorite thing to do in the world.
Was there a point when you could see like being a musician as a career path? Say, was there a particular moment when it felt this was worth a shot? Because I think he was doing a lot of stuff in cover bands touring, but was there like a transition to making a career doing original music?
I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be involved in music in some way, probably from about the age of 11, just from hearing those records. I'm glad that I've had that settled in my life early. As a career path, I just sort of stumbled into it, I guess, through just diligence.
Did you move to Birmingham, Alabama eventually? Was that like the nearest big music hub for you to move your career to the next level?
Yes, I did. Birmingham's about an hour away. Then I hooked up with a couple of bands that were touring around the Southeast, playing the college circuit, a lot of fraternity parties and after game parties and whatnot, and met a lot of wonderful musicians. I mean, Alabama is filled with some fantastic world-class musicians. Damon Johnson, of course, great friend of mine. I met him pretty soon after I moved to Birmingham. He was just always the coolest guy to me.
Because you was in the band Love Bang, which also featured Scott Collier, who would go on to be the drummer for Brother Kane as well, right? So all these paths keep crossing.
Scott and I were in a band together called Baghdad. We just played like 80s, you know, like Whitesnake and whatnot. Another wonderful dear friend of mine, we both could like listen to Zappa for hours on these drives, you know, and so we had a rapport musically.
What was kind of the starting point for the band Love Bang? Was that a band you joined, or was it a band you formed with Scott? Do you remember?
I went to college on a kind of like a liberal arts scholarship when I was 18. And one of my friends from high school, Chris Baker, we hooked up with a guy once we went to college named Tony Brock, and they started writing songs. And they had procured a development deal with Ardent Studios in Memphis because we had a friend that went to engineering school and he was working as an engineer at Ardent. Eventually, those songs caught the ear of Jody Stevens from Big Star.
Right.
You know, it looked like we'd be able to record more songs. So got involved with my high school buds and we did that for a while. We shopped around for a deal. I mean, it was very pop and kind of British in a lot of ways. I'm very proud of it to this day.
Yeah, because you did the album, is it Rule of 72s? Is that the album that was recorded?
Yes, that's what it is. And it was just kind of released independently at that point. I remember, you know, sitting down and just trying to come up with the parts and make something interesting. Of course, this was also about the time that Jellyfish's first record came out.
Yeah, this is like early 90s kind of time, right?
Yes, we were all Jellyfish fans from the get-go, hearing Belly Button for the first time. But we were already involved in writing music before we heard them.
So how did that opportunity to audition for Jellyfish come along after Love Bang had run its course? I mean, that must have been cool for you if you're already a fan.
It was daunting and a little bit scary.
Yeah.
What had happened, see, is Tim Smith played with a band called The Producers. another great band from the day. And Love Bang was opening a few shows for them in Atlanta. And I had found out about the open audition through Tim. You know, we were drinking tequila in a hot tub somewhere one night. I mean, we were wild as hell back then. I went home. I've been using recording gear from the time I could afford 4 tracks. So I put down a couple of songs. One of them was No Matter What by Badfinger. I thought, hey, I'll do a cover of Badfinger. Maybe they'll like that. Only to find that they had been covering it in their live set as well, which was kind of weird. But got a call back from them pretty quick. Roger called me. Hey, you want to come to LA? And I went, yeah.
Because it's kind of a strange time in the early 90s. Had you been a fan of all the massive commercial hard rock stuff of the previous 5 or 6 years, and then everything changed when the Seattle scene broke, where had you found yourself in all of that?
Well, I always kind of had my head up my own ass in a way about music in general. Like, I grew up on rock and roll, but from about the time of 16 or so, I started trying to go as far out as I could go listening to music. So Kate Bush was always a huge thing in my house. Fusion, jazz, like Alan Holdsworth, classical guitar. Southern California punk rock is my jam. The 90s punk, I like it as well, but I like Fear Records, Angry Samoans. I like the really kind of raw sounding stuff. It was just a mix of anything weird that I could get my hands on. The Police, love the Police. Thomas Dolby, I liked techno pop from that era, from the early 80s.
Did you have somebody who you could go to say, what do I need to listen to? Or was you just finding anything you thought looked cool? Or other than your sister all these years earlier, did you have like a guy in a record store?
I have a really great best friend, and she was so hip. She was just always discovering cool music. And, you know, our life back then was you're done with school, you go to the mall, you go to the local record store. Yeah, you know everybody that works there. You would go through the cutout bins because obviously you're broke. And you would go, that cover looks great. Oh, my God, who is this? Kid Creole and the Coconuts. I'm buying it. And you'd take it home. I can say I was very rarely disappointed most of the time.
Thousands of dollars spent on most of these albums. There's got to be one nugget in there that's worthwhile.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All your classical music. They always had classical music in the cutout bins.
How was it coming out to California to audition for Jellyfish? Because wasn't the second album still being mixed?
Yes, it was. And they didn't have a lot of time to hang out. So I went to the studio while they were mixing. You know, I would hang out in the lounge a little bit. Eventually, it came time to try me out. So we all met up in my hotel room. I think Tim and I were either sharing a room or we had separate rooms. Anyway, it was an acoustic guitar and just us singing. And I was suffering from strep throat, of all things. So I could barely open my mouth. But I somehow made my way through the audition. I think they argued over it a bit. It's like, should we get him or should we get David Tweed? There was another guy from Ohio, fantastic, truly fantastic genius. If you've ever checked out any of his stuff, it's called The Lollipop Factory. And I think he might have been up for the gig. I think Lyle Workman might have been up for the gig, but somehow they chose me, and I'm just glad they did.
Did you feel like each project you was doing was getting bigger and bigger with more opportunities coming along? Did you feel in a good place? Like, I'm on my path now?
Well, during the time of Jellyfish, it felt like you had arrived somewhat.
Yeah.
Of course, the band broke up. So I was kind of back to square one. You know, it's funny when you're a musician, you never really all the time feel like you've made it because you'll play Madison Square Garden one night and then the next day you're helping your friend put in flooring for some extra money. It's like that, you know, even now for me. I'm not mainly because I'm not Beyonce. I'm just not beautiful. And, you know, so I have to kind of work harder.
You have to kind of have that headspace mindset that things could change. You're always looking for the next thing.
Yeah.
But saying that though, like things began to like really happen fast for you around then. Today, a few years can roll by in a blink of an eye without anything happening. But whilst that Jellyfish experience would only last a year or so after touring, I think you continued to work with Roger and the early seeds of Imperial drag would be put into place. But then an opportunity to audition for Slash's Snakepit comes along. Your head must have been like, where do I turn next? Was it that fast moving back then?
It was so fast. I mean, within 6 months of coming out here and sleeping on couches, all these opportunities arose. I couldn't believe it. I was just trying to get off of the couch, you know, like trying to get out of my friend's place and try to get something stable happening.
You know, that's a title for your biography, you know, trying to get off the couch.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm still trying to do that some days. But yeah, the Slash thing was almost like serendipitous in the way that it happened. And then once I started working with him, then I really felt like I was in the Rolling Stones because it was just first class and massive.
I mean, other than like a killer vocal performance on that album, was you able to contribute to the songwriting on 5 O'Clock Somewhere, or was a lot of it already in place?
The music was done. I didn't really have any say in the music, but once Slash decided that I was the guy for the job, he gave me a yellow pad and a pen and put me in a room, and we went to Rumbo Recorders, and every day you just tackle a new piece of music and start writing lyrics. I mean, this is before the internet.
Yeah.
So you're just stuck with your own head. You know, you're in a room. I didn't even have the TV on. All I would do is just drink coffee and Jack Daniels and scribble.
And like joining that band and the following touring cycle, like you say, you went everywhere on that album, including Castle Donington show in 1995 with Metallica, Skid Row and White Zombie. What are your memories of that? Was that like next level?
That's been the pinnacle of my career in many ways.
Wow.
That show alone. Yeah, because I've played for some big crowds before, but never a crowd that big. I couldn't even see the end of people. You know, it was just this ocean.
Had you seen photos of the Monsters of Rock beforehand in magazines?
Yeah, I could not believe it. In a way, you feel a little bit like you're thrown to the wolves. I mean, I felt a little bit like that as well, because having to not fill Axl's shoes, but I was the replacement guy. So I'm only glad that we were well received, you know.
I think you was introduced as Hugh Grant's fan club. Who came up with that?
I don't know. Like I said, we were drinking. So could have been anybody.
Yeah. Was James Lomenzo on bass for that tour?
Yes, he was. And Brian Tichy on drums, Gilby Clark.
That's a lineup right there.
Oh, yeah. Everybody in the band is just like stellar.
Just add to the pressure on Eric Dover's shoulders.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I learned a lot from Slash. You know, he's a wise guy. I was very green, even through Jellyfish. I still was a bit green, you know, but coming out here, you know, LA is it's a big city. It can be a bit jaded, but you have to have some smarts about you. And I think that Slash taught me a lot about how to do that.
After the Slash record, you'd return to working with Roger Manning and release the wonderful Imperial Drag album. Hands up, I was late to that record. It was through a band I joined a couple of years after its release, but they would always bang on about how great it was, which led me to get on board. But do you remember being on a show TFI Friday with Chris Evans?
I do. I remember we were drinking. Lemonheads were on that show, right?
Yeah, it came up on IMDb and it says the Lemonheads and Manic Street Preachers were also on it.
Yeah, I remember that now. That was so much fun, but it was really fast for us because we literally flew in to do the show and then we had to fly back to Texas to open for the Goo Goo Dolls.
Wow.
There's 2 times in my life where I've literally flown to the UK for one day and then flown back, and that was one of them. I wish I could have stayed longer because it was a lot of fun.
Did you do Jules Holland, or was that with Jellyfish you did Jules Holland?
Yes, we did. That was with Leonard Cohen and Roddy Frame. And that was another, like, holy shit. I loved my Aztec camera records and I love Leonard Cohen. So that was a dream come true, really.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you'd start doing the Glam Nation band alongside Ryan Roxy and Eric Singer, which was you guys playing shows doing like great glam rock covers such as The Sweet and T-Rex. I remember seeing photos of those shows like way back when I first got to know Ryan and seeing all these amazing photos which we were doing way before YouTube is what it is today. Was there anything like you guys around then? It was such an unusual time for bands who wanted to play good time rock and roll.
Not to my knowledge.
No.
You know, there was a band from the mid to late 90s called Celebrity Skin. Not the whole song, not the Courtney Love song, but a band called Celebrity Skin. And to me, those guys were completely inspiring because they were so freaking glam, but it was very Southern California glam, kind of its own thing. We just did it for the same reason, to get together and dress up in goofy outfits, you know, spray the glitter cannons and whatnot.
Where was you playing in Hollywood? Did you have different residences, or was it always in the same place?
Yeah, we played at different places, but there was one place on Melrose that we used to pack out all the time called The Joint, I believe.
Yeah.
There used to be 2 or 3 of those. There was 2 of them in LA. But yeah, I mean, we just kind of played around the Hollywood scene and had a few laughs and hopefully made some people happy.
What was the reaction to it? People like, this is what I've been waiting 5 years. We've not seen anything like this for ages.
It was really weird because since Imperial Drag disbanded, I went into like hermit mode and started writing songs, and I didn't even get out at all till Eric Singer and Ryan called me. And I've known Eric since Slash. I couldn't believe showing up to play these club shows, and they were absolutely packed because people wanted that at the time. Now you've got all kinds of kind of cool jams that go on in LA. You got Chuck Wright's Thing at the Whiskey, which I've done a number of times. There's still rock music out here.
Your friendship with Roxy and Eric, that'd lead to an opportunity to work with Alice Cooper, and after touring Brutal Planet and working on Dragontown, you'd have a hand in what is my favourite Alice Cooper record, The Eyes of Alice Cooper. That's a great album from top to bottom. I think you said that was a fun and organic writing experience for you all.
Yeah, it was very organic. And, to be able to write with the man himself, I mean...
What was the process?
Oh, well, the process was rather easy. He's such a wise person, and he's got such a great sense of humor about him. It was really quite an easy pleasure. But he just gave me a notebook full of lyrics that he'd scribbled down. I would kind of start music, on the 4-track, kind of run it by him. And then eventually Roxy shows up with some ideas, and we all came together at a certain point. But what I really love about that record is it's all live performance. Everybody in the same room, such a wonderful feeling to be able to do that rather than the way that musicians kind of are forced to record a lot of the time now.
How things are today, I got to ask, is there any footage of you guys doing that? Because that would have been everywhere nowadays, everyone with a phone. But back then, I guess there wasn't the opportunity to do that.
I don't believe so. I just remember coming out and my ears ringing at the end of the day, it was cranked.
Yeah. Cranked
as loud as it could get, which I just love the sound of something like that. You can't really get that with computer modeling. I would find it impossible, Very Detroit.
Where was the writing done at?
Between Phoenix. I would go to Phoenix occasionally and stay at his house, do a little bit of writing. I had a home studio at home, so I'd demo stuff there, and then we'd all meet up at my house. Eventually, we recorded with Mudrock at a studio which is right next to Mate's rehearsal. I live right down the street from it.
What would young Eric Dover have said if he said, right, you got to come to Alice Cooper's house in Phoenix to write some new songs?
I don't know. I just would have lost my mind. I remember being 8 years old or whatever when Alice Cooper Goes to Hell came out. That was the 8-track days, and just come home after school and get in the car and put the 8-track in and listen to I Never Cry and ruminate about the little girl that I had the crush on, and just innocent times.
Speaking about legendary people, in 2006, you're invited to jam at, I'm going to say, the infamous Backyard Party with Eddie Van Halen. I think you said it was pretty off the scale with dancers, and I think Eddie was doing a porn soundtrack at the time. What do you remember about getting the call to do that? Was it a last minute thing, or was there much preparation for it?
It was completely last minute. I actually got the call from Slim Jim Phantom of the Stray Cats. He and I are great friends, and he had got word that Eddie needed a backing band.
Can you repeat that, please, Jim? Can you repeat that? Make sure I heard you right.
Yeah. I was like, okay, well, now with Slash, I'd played a few shows with Van Halen in California. So I'd met Eddie once or twice before, and Sammy, Michael Anthony, just briefly, just peripherally. But that was the wildest party I've ever attended in my life to this day, bar none.
Lived through the 80s and 90s, wildest one, 2006.
Yeah, there were people there all over the place. Cirque du Soleil dancers in his living room, hanging off of hoops, and there was porn, stills from this movie, I guess. He did give us a tour of 5150.
Oh, man.
That was cool. And one of the funniest stories to me, and I'll never forget it, we were somewhere back in the main room where the drums are all mic'd up and recorded, and I was trying to kind of make small talk, hey, Ed, that's a really interesting miking technique you have going on the drums. I didn't know shit. I was just trying to, say something, and he's going, yeah, a lot of guys ask me this and that. They go, how do you get that sound? And I go, how do you spell gear? G. And that's where he left it. To me, that always stuck with me because it was so non sequitur.
Yeah.
How do you spell gear? G. I went, that's so Ed, man. I just loved it.
Oh. What songs did you do? There's a couple of clips on YouTube. It's Ain't Talking About Love and Jump.
To be honest with you, I don't really quite remember it all. Because as the night went on, I had a few drinks myself. I just know that by the end of the night, my girlfriend at the time was water sliding naked into the pool, and Mark and Brian, the DJs, were there, and we were watching my girlfriend naked go off of the slide. And
what time did it finish? 2 days later?
Yeah, I don't really remember, but I think about maybe 3 o'clock, 2 or 3 o'clock. But yeah, it became surreal at a certain point. So I just went, okay.
You stayed forever busy up until present day. You have your alter ego project Sextus, supergroup touring band Lost Angels, which I think boasts some of the coolest lineups and set lists ever, but also the Lickerish Quartet, which has been met with such a positive reaction worldwide. Can you give us an insight into that as it sees you reuniting with Roger Manning once again, but also Tim Smith of Jellyfish? I believe the early beginnings go back to is it 2017? But you've been releasing a series of EPs since the lockdown.
That project began in 2017, and it started when Roger called Tim up and said, hey, what are you doing? Let's reconnect, because we'd also worked on Tim's stuff together, the Uma Jets, and that was years ago. So we hadn't had a chance to reconnect in a long time. So thankfully, they called me up and asked me if I wanted to be involved. But truthfully, I think it's because Jason Faulkner was busy. No, I'm kidding. But I'm glad they did. And then we all just started writing from there. We got together over at my studio and sat around old school acoustic guitars.
Are Roger and Tim both on the West Coast as well, or are they elsewhere?
Yes, Roger is in LA and Tim is in Atlanta. He had to come out a few times, and then that's kind of how we started getting the material together. Very organic.
Was all the initial recordings done together at one time with the full vision for the 3 EPs right from the start, and you've been finishing them remotely, or have you got together several times to do the different EPs?
We were lucky before the incident, the worldwide incident that I won't name. We had the songs written basically. So we had Jeremy Stacy, who plays with King Crimson now, does a lot of session work. He's a fantastic musician. He did all the drum tracking for us. So we had that part done. We had a number of tracks, whether it was some vocals or some guitars or a bass, but we didn't have everything totally finished. So we did have to start working remotely at a certain point. And that's kind of how we finished it all, really.
Who's the creative force behind the whole visual element of it? Because you guys have got a great YouTube channel with everything going off in there, and it's constantly things being added to it. Who brings that whole aesthetic to the table?
We have a videographer that helps us out. And then we've got Frankie Siragusa that was also help engineer. We did a lot of sessions over at his studio as well. So between what we wanted and Todd Stanton is our videographer in Florida, he's kind of the video guy for us. Frankie helped out on some photography. And then we all kind of just talked amongst ourselves on what we would like to see or what we could afford to do, or lockdown was still going on at the time. So we shot The Dream That Took Me Over. And it's just basically me riding around in a friend's Mercedes because no budget.
I love that, though. For me, this is going back to that romanticism for me being in the UK, seeing you driving around in a car in, well, I'm guessing it's North Hollywood kind of area or whatever. To me, that is just so cool. So
cool.
Just go with it, because loads of people think it's amazing.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of great spots around here. I mean, I guess we could have went somewhere fancy, but I was like, hey, man, there's a median over here next to where I get my tacos, and it's great. The cars will be going in both directions. Let's do that. A million spots, man. I wish I was a location scout. I mean, you can get any country you want here if you kind of look around the right places.
What's been your experience of launching a new band during such a strange period of time? Is it both a blessing and a curse in a way that you've not got to worry about a tour coming up? You can just focus on the music and promote it properly. Well, promote it as you do these days. Has there been positives and negatives to it, do you think?
Probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
Kind of cosmically funny that, we decided to get together after so long, and then said incident happens.
Damn it.
You kind of almost have to laugh in a way, but it didn't really take away from our determination to complete the project.
I mean, it's gone down a storm. You've been doing it all on vinyl as well, so hats off to you for that, but they've just gone straight out the door, all sold out.
It makes me really happy to be involved with it. I didn't know what the end product was going to sound like until I heard it completed, and then I marvel at Tim and Roger's talents every day. But getting to do it again was a blast.
Wonderful, man. And your creativity and passion for music, it's still unshaken and as vibrant as ever from what I can see. What is it that continues to inspire you to this day? Is it working with different people, or do you still have times you get as excited about it as when you first heard that Elton John record or that Alice Cooper record or stuff like that? What is it that keeps you going? Is it just all it's music every day?
I think it's just sort of a nomadic lifestyle that I've just grown up with. You go through different points with your creativity. Sometimes you're just on it 24 hours a day. But then for me, sometimes it's I don't want to touch a guitar for 2 weeks. That doesn't happen a lot, but I don't want to do music and burn out, in my creative process. So I try not to buy into my own hype when I'm working on music. So when I go and work on it, then I can have some kind of, at least a little bit more objectivity. because like in my late 20s, I was just burning so much midnight oil, looking for arrangements, learning how to do things. I mean, learning how to do digital audio production, which kind of new back in 1999 for people. Now it's actually easier than ever and enjoyable. So I'm going to try to stay with that.
Awesome, man. I've loved chatting with you, Eric. I'm glad we finally got to hook this up. I mean, we've crossed paths a few times over the years at Lost Angels gigs, but it's, as it is with gigs, it's normally a, hey, how you doing? And all that kind of stuff. You don't get a chance to speak properly.
But yeah, hopefully we'll bump into each other again.
Eric, lovely to speak to you, mate. You enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Rob. Great talking to you, buddy.
You could be the love of my life. I don't know, maybe I'm way too wild and young in my mind, but I've gotta let you know that I feel you are the dream that took me over, the dream that took me over, and all I wanna do is climb with you away into the night. The dream that took me over, the dream that took me over.
Huge thanks to Eric Dover for joining me on today's podcast. He really is one of the best out there, and if you're new to his story, career and catalogue, then please enjoy everything you find. The Lickerish Quartet can be found at thelickerishquartet.com, and if you head on over to sextus.com, that will link you to Eric's Bandcamp page and his Sextus music. Truly hope he's back in the UK soon too. Now, there's a lot happening with the Straight to Video 80s video shop, which opens on Saturday the 23rd of July in Alfreton, Derbyshire. We've got a special guest opening the shop for us. Darth Vader himself will be in attendance. Actor Spencer Wilding, who played Darth Vader in Rogue One, along with appearances in Guardians of the Galaxy, The Wolfman and Doctor Who, shall be signing autographs during the day. So if you want to come along, be sure to check out 80s Video Shop on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for all the updates. And that is all for today's show. Hope you've enjoyed it, and please catch up on any older episodes you may have missed at stvpod.com. But thanks for all the love and support, and I look forward to chatting again soon.